Hey.
Good morning. Don't say anything you don't want anyone to hear.
Okay. I won't say anything bad about anybody.
Give me 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sha-la-la. Oh, we need a mic? Yeah, I forgot about that.
I got you a mic. I got a mic on you, but it's not.
Okay. Let's see here.
That
Was off?
Hey, we can read you. We got captions.
Oh, yeah, really? Well, that's impressive.
Yeah, closed captions.
Closed captions. Wonder why they never have open captions. Isn't there some reason for that? Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Is that better?
You're not loud enough, Larry.
I'm not loud enough? How about now?
No, they sure am not hearing you in the class.
Well, let's see here. Microphone.
Yeah, there you are. Now.
You can hear me now? Ooh, that's awful.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, there is a delay. Hey, Stevie, how you doing? Hey, Don, can you take your phone off speaker?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, because I'm getting a lot of feed in my back here.
I see what's. I got another call.
Uh-oh.
There you go, Larry.
Okay, I think that's better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone now.
Yeah, all that.
Well, no.
It's not nearly as bad as it was.
What's that?
All that feedback is not nearly as bad as it was now that you got it on just regular, not speaker.
Thing is, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you fine, Larry. Well, what? I guess I need to talk in the phone. We can hear you fine.
Okay, good.
But well, now I'm not hearing you.
What?
That's the delay I was talking about a while ago.
Okay. I'm just gonna cool my heels here and listen to what you guys do there with the announcements and the prayer and the scripture reading, and I'll start after all that's done.
Okay, I'll leave the phone on.
That'll be good.
I don't have it on. Okay, let's try it now. There you go. Thank you, Nick. Advisory council meeting tomorrow night, and business meeting Wednesday night. Everyone can be there. As far as I'm going to have Ed do our prayer here in just a minute. You have the prayer list. Is there any updates on the prayer list? Yes, Bill. That's cool. Any others? Yes.
For those of you online, the class is meeting in person, and they're going through the prayer list right now. All right. Thanks, Don. Well, good morning and welcome to another streaming version. This by reason of infection from our cozy home here on sunny Highland Drive. When we think of the Psalms, if we had to associate a single person with the book of Psalms, who would that be? And if I were there, I would wait for a response. But this business of back and forth between the class and myself here now is a little trickier than I thought it would be. There's a substantial delay than I thought there would be, and there's also the problem of feedback. But I think all of us know the answer. When we think of the book of Psalms, the first person who comes to mind is David. We associate the Psalms with David. David, the shepherd boy. David, the great warrior. David, the sweet singer of Israel. David, the man after God's own heart. David, the king of Israel. David, the murderer and adulterer. And the default position in many churches seems to be that any psalm that has the words of David attached to it at the heading was actually written by David himself. But not all scholars agree with that. In fact, many scholars disagree with that. And they cite the fact that the book of Psalms was assembled for the purpose of worship at the Second Temple. And the Second Temple was erected long after David lived. Just a quick review here. The first temple was erected during the reign of Solomon. We associate the year 1000 BC with David's reign. So Solomon comes on the heels of David's reign, and the first temple is built then, erected then, and then you have this long period of time, the Babylonian captivity, etc. And then the temple is actually raised. It's torn to the ground, and the second temple is erected after the Babylonian captivity, after Cyrus, the Persian emperor, allows Nehemiah and others to go back to Jerusalem. So what we have here is a situation where we have the life of David and his many famous and infamous exploits at around 1000 BC, and then the worship at the Second Temple would be closer to 200 BC. So you have a period of about 800 years there, a lag of about 800 years between David, the active person, and the compilation of the book of Psalms. So centuries passed between David and the organization of the book of Psalms. So many scholars will say that the Psalms were more recent compositions, and the term of David, as it's attached to some 70 of the Psalms in the book as we have it now, it may not be a guarantee that it actually came from David's own pen or stylus, but rather possibly that the psalm is composed about David, based on writings or traditions that had survived over the centuries. It might be that an entire psalm is composed around some brief saying or line of David that had survived that vast expanse of time, some 800 years. And I point this out, not to be dogmatic, and not to dissuade anyone from any long-held and cherished idea, or to suggest that any psalm or part of the Bible is less than authoritative. but only for this reason. When the scholars study the history and archaeology of the Psalms, some tend to conclude that Psalm 18 may have actually been penned by David himself and survived the centuries intact. It is striking to me that you have this sort of commentary on these scholars who are doubtful about David's authorship of many of the Psalms that are attributed to him, or where the book says of David. But even those doubtful scholars will say, some of them say, that when we get to Psalm 18, we may be actually reading something that was written some 800 years before the book of Psalms was organized, and may have been written by David himself. So these scholars say, well, no, let me go on and give you a little bit more of my basis for that. C.S. Lewis has written a book called Reflections on the Psalms, and he says this in that book. The Psalms were written by many poets. That's another thing we need to keep in mind as we study Psalms. The Psalms are songs. They are not narratives. They're meant to be sung. They're a part of worship. The Psalms were written by many poets and at many different dates. Some, I believe, are allowed to go back to the reign of David. I think certain scholars allow that Psalm 18 might be by David himself. So that's Lewis, who was a guy that, certainly not unlearned, not unread, who makes that comment on Psalm 18. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give you a moment now to open your Bibles and turn to Psalm 18 with me. It's not a psalm we often look at. It's not a psalm that's immediately familiar to us, like the 23rd Psalm or maybe Psalm 90. And Ross, what's your favorite? 46?
God is our refuge and strength.
Yeah, Ross's favorite is 46. That's another sort of well-known psalm. Psalm 16 is my favorite, and we hear about Psalm 103 time and again. But Psalm 18 is not one of the sort of standard go-to psalms in Christian worship. It's rather lengthy, but I want us to look at it today, and I want to particularly turn your attention to verses 29 through, let's say 29 through at least 34. Let's take another look here. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Yeah, we'll start with verse 29. So I hope I've given you time to find that psalm. It's easy to find it. Psalm 18 comes right after Psalm 17, right before Psalm 19. And I'm going to read it here, and we'll talk about it for a moment. I'm reading Psalm 18, starting with verse 29. For by you I can run against a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all those who take a refuge in him. Who is God but the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? The God who equipped me with strength and made my way blameless. He made my feet like the feet of a deer and set me to secure on the heights. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. Okay. Now, given what we have said this morning about the authorship of the book of Psalms, and particularly the authorship of Psalm 18, I want to ask you, and to get, I guess I could get responses online. Roz is standing by at the keyboards, if you want to give me a response by typing it in, that would be easier for me to handle. But the question is this, and even if I don't get an answer, I want you to think about it. When we read this passage that I just read for you this morning in Psalm 18, do you see anything unique or different about the voice that you hear? The voice you hear in this psalm. Again, we're familiar with so many of the psalms, maybe not so much with this. And my question is, does anyone see or hear a little bit of a different voice or tone in this psalm? Remember, there are those who say, this psalm's distinct. It's different. This may have been, 800 years old at the time the book of Psalms were put together, and it may have actually come from David's pen itself. Now, many poems, many songs, many psalms may contain an emotional or spiritual truth, but one poet may express the same truth in a quite different way from another. So again, I'm asking you, when you read this passage in Psalm 18, do you hear a voice that maybe it sounds a little different? And I'm looking here, I've got Steve McClure with us here on YouTube, and he's got an answer for me, and I'm going to talk about what Steve has to say. And I will look, and I've got Roz standing by here, and we'll see if we get any other responses. I'm going to wait just a few moments because I realize that I'm dealing with maybe a 7, 8, 9, 10 second delay here. So I'm going to just take a moment and see if I get any responses here. What do you think about the tone or the sound of the voice in this psalm? And I've got a good response from Stevie, and we'll talk about it if we have. We will talk about it. And let's just see if we get any others. Good morning, Mom. Good morning. Good morning, Mom. My mom is watching. My mom is watching down in sunny North Carolina this morning. And I'll bet she's glad she's in North Carolina. All right. Still waiting. We may have Mike Eckel with us this morning. Mike Eckel's with us? Mm-hmm. Well, great to see you, Mike, or at least be with you. Mike Eckel says good morning. Wow, great. That's just great. Been a while. Okay, so the question is, when we read Psalm 18, in particular the passage I read this morning, do we hear there a little bit different tone, maybe, than we do when we think of the other Psalms that are more familiar to us? More, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Do we hear a little bit of different tone there? Do we find any support? Can we imagine any support for what C.S. Lewis says about this psalm, that it may have actually been penned by David? And I'm not getting any responses online. Did you get any, Ross?
There's one from Barb and one from Nick.
Okay.
Nick and Bethany, I don't know.
Okay. We got a little bit here. Let's see. All right. Okay, Barbara Dehart says, if you are feeling pressure of everyday life, shift your burdens to God's shoulders. He can handle it. And Nick and Bethany Hand say, a voice that is courageous and fearless. And that really dovetails with what my good friend, my longtime brother, Steve McClure says. Steve McClure says this psalm is actually obviously from a warrior. Mm-hmm. And it has that look and feel. Yeah, Jenny.
Debbie Penny just said that.
Yeah.
A relieved warrior speaking.
Okay. Yeah. In this psalm, we hear the voice of a real warrior. And that may tend to support the idea that Lewis gives us in Reflections on the Psalm, that this is maybe the authorship here is a little different. Maybe this is actually David. Psalm 18 is a poem describing battle. It's describing physical battle. It is describing armed warfare. The writer, David, describes being caught in dire straits and being dramatically rescued by God in a fantastic way. He goes on to extol the power and righteousness of God and then lists the particular gifts that God has bestowed upon him for the fight. Let me repeat that last sentence because I'm going to turn it into a question. David goes on to extol the power and righteousness of God and then lists particular gifts God has bestowed on him for the fight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the $64,000 question is this. What are those gifts that God has bestowed on David according to this psalm in this passage? What are they? And I'll wait just a moment. This is not a tough question, but let's see if we have those out there. Let's see if everybody at the church now and online, let's see who's awake at least. Who's with me? Who's reading? I'll repeat the question because we have a lag in time here. What are those particular gifts that God has bestowed on the warrior David for the fight? Roz has got an answer, and it's a good one, and we'll get to that. I don't want to publish it right now because I want to wait and see if others have something to say. What now? All right, here we go. Sherry Griffith, strength, and that is exactly what Roz is sitting here flexing her biceps and is an awesome sight to behold. And she says strength. That's so she and Sherry, both of them nurses. No, is Sherry a nurse?
She's a medical.
Both of them. They're on the same page here. And Roz also says not only strength but courage. And Ed McClure adds to that. Not just strength but agility and endurance. Yes.
Hans feet on high places. He's right.
Who's that? Hans feet on high places.
Yeah. His feet like the feet of a deer. That's agility.
Yeah. Right. Strength, agility, endurance, training. Yeah.
Good one, Eddie.
Okay. Good, Eddie. Yeah. All right. Now here's the next question, ladies and gentlemen. And got a response from Steve. Steve's kind of on the same page as the rest of us. He says strength, protection, and presence. Let's do this. Here's the question. When we see these rather bold allusions to physical strength here, physical strength, physical speed, physical agility, when we see these allusions to these physical things that David is talking about here as being gifts from God, what do we automatically do with those, almost without even thinking? When we read these, what do we automatically do with those allusions to physical strength? How do we actually read and interpret those? And I will wait a moment there. Somebody put some thought in there, and I'll repeat the question maybe more than once. When we see these rather bold, cut and dried allusions to physical strength, strength, as Eddie would say, endurance, agility, training, speed. When we see these allusions, what do we do with them when we read them? What do you and I do with those when we're reading the Psalms and we see those? What do we do with them? Waiting on you, Stevie. Getting anything there, Ross? Not a word. Not a word. Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to let people fall asleep here. And I'll say this: when you and I here in the 21st century, as civilized and cultivated and coddled as we are, when we see these allusions to physical strength, physical endurance, physical speed, physical agility, when we see them, I'm going to offer this, and if there is any pushback here, I want to hear it. I want to hear it if there's any disagreement. We immediately and automatically convert these statements into a metaphor. When we see these statements about physical strength, physical ability, physical stability, speed, etc., when we see them, when we see David say, God makes my hand so strong I can bend a bow of bronze. When we read those, we, almost without thinking about it, convert them to metaphor. And we think, well, when we read that, that's not really, the meaning there for me is not so much about physical strength as it is about spiritual strength. So we read these verses metaphorically, generally speaking. And if we do so, if we read these as metaphor, are we justified in doing that? Roz looks very thoughtful. Okay, we're no responses. No. Okay. We're getting near the end here, time wise. So I'm doing take off here and say we immediately, we moderns immediately and almost without thinking convert these verses to metaphors. We don't think twice about it, and here we go. I'm going to say we're right to do so. They must be read metaphorically if they are to have universal application for the Christian. I can remember Dr. Weaver commenting on some of the Psalms to the effect that, quote, this song is the writing of a very young man. And if we think of David as the writer of the Psalms, we think of him writing this in his strength. We think of him writing this in his glory, in his prime. And so if these Psalms are to have meaning for the rest of us, the rest of us who are not Olympic athletes or warriors, we must interpret them metaphorically. After all, we know that our real battle is not against flesh and blood. It is a spiritual battle against the powers and principalities, against evil. Thus, the physical strength and speed that we see described here, we interpret as spiritual strength and speed. The ability to withstand the fiery darts of Satan. Now, having said all of that, let me ask one more question. Did the writer, and we'll say it's David for purposes of our discussion this morning, we'll say it's, did the writer originally intend these verses as metaphor? Roz looks so thoughtful. We read these verses metaphorically, and we're justified in doing it. Anybody would tell you that's the way that a Christian should read them. And then the next question is, if we say with C.S. Lewis. This psalm was, this is really David here. It's David writing in the strength of his youth. Did he intend these verses as metaphors when he wrote them?
Eddie said no, Debbie said no, and I'm saying no. I think it's exactly what he's recounting real things.
Yeah, that's right. We've got some good feedback here. And who is it? Debbie Payne
and Eddie both said no and no.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
And I said no, but I'm adding that he was just exactly. It was like one of those where they attribute to what just happened. They're giving a whole.
Yeah, it's just like a report.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like a report of his battle. David. If we agree with Lewis that this is actually the writing of David, we pretty much have to say that David is not, talking about metaphorical abstractions. He's talking about what happened yesterday when he whipped the Philistines. He's talking about things that actually happened to him. Okay. What can that mean for you and me? We talked a couple of weeks ago about the verse that says, glorify God in your body. Glorify God in your body. What does it mean to do that? At 1 Corinthians 6:20. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the word glorify. Glorify is a word we hear bandied about in church and in the Bible, and we don't use it much in normal daily conversation. So what does it mean to glorify something? What does that mean? Roz, you got any idea? What does it mean to glorify? When Paul in writing to Corinthians says, glorify God in your body, what does he mean by glorify? And given that our time is running out here, and we have this long delay. I'm going to say this. To glorify God means to make his presence and action in the world obvious. To glorify God means to make his presence and action in the world obvious. Or to put it another way, to glorify God means to make him look good. To glorify God in our body might mean different things to different people. Somebody 25 years old might glorify God in his or her body by making sure that it looks the best that it can look. I'm going to read a couple verses from Song of Solomon. Get ready to be surprised here. Remember, I'm reading from the Bible. This is the woman in Song of Solomon. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His head is the finest gold. His locks are wavy and black as a raven. And then the man speaks of his lover, his woman, and says this, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, prince's daughter. The curves of your hips are like jewels, the work of the hands of an artist. Song of Solomon. At other stages in life, the goal is not the same. What does it mean to glorify God in your body long after year 25 has passed? We're down to 7 minutes, so I think I've got a punchline here that I really want to get to, and so I'm going to jump ahead, and I want to talk a little bit about a guy. Well, first of all, I want to give you a pithy quote, and if you take nothing else away from today's lesson, if you can take this. I may be satisfied that I've done my job. Here's the quote. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. The way that it was probably originally interpreted was the glory of God is man fully alive, but the term man there means humanity and a human being. And that is a quote from a writer by the name of Irenaeus. And if I was there with my coveted whiteboard and erasable markers, I would write his name on the board. It's spelled Irenaeus, Irenaeus. He was one of the most important early church fathers of the 2nd century AD. I can give you a little bit about his history. He became the Bishop of Lyon in southern France, although he apparently grew up in Smyrna in modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor in the Bible. And you remember Smyrna was one of the cities that the Spirit had a message for in the book of Revelation. Irenaeus apparently was a disciple of St. Polycarp, and you may have heard of him. And anyway, Polycarp was one of the apostolic fathers who in turn knew the Apostle John, the son of Zebedee. So, this is Irenaeus's pedigree. St. John is one of Christ's 12 apostles, and and Polycarp was someone taught by a disciple of John, and then Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp. His major work, Irenaeus' major work against heresies, was written about AD 185, and this quote, "The glory of God is humanity fully alive," and darn it, we only have 4 minutes, so I'm going to go right to the chase here. What does it mean to glorify God in our body? How should we live? It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And I want to ask one final question here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to respond. But what sort of contemporary movie do we have that explores the different kinds of freedom that a person might have? And that's really a hard question in the standing alone. But let me say this: the answer might be easier when I tell you that this movie is a seasonal movie and not Christmas, but a movie that has to do with another winter holiday. And Roz has got the answer. She's grinning. It's one of our favorites. But I'm going to wait and see if I get a response from anybody in the group. What movie explores freedom and the different types of freedom? Get anything, Ross? I know you've got the answer. I can see that wry smile.
Bob Dehart got it.
Bob Dehart has it? Barbara Dehart has it? Okay. All right. Barbara Dehart, Groundhog Day. Absolutely. Ed McClure, Groundhog Day. Yes, absolutely. And we only have a minute and a half left, and the lessons and messages of Groundhog Day are far, far too broad to squeeze into 90 seconds. So I'm going to leave it there and hope that I'll be back with you live and in person next week. It's been great being with you this morning. And if you want to be ready for next week's lesson, watch Groundhog Day and think about what it says about freedom and what you and I might do with freedom. And I'm going to leave it to Dawn or Ed or someone there in the group to appoint someone to make a closing prayer. And I'm going to shut it down from here and say goodbye. And thank you for your time and attention. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good enough. Don?
You might have to fire me.
What?
I forgot to share it to the church.
Yeah, I saw that. I thought Nick would do
It was a little disjointed, not knowing that.
Stevie McClure says, stay well, take vitamin C and D and elderberry extract. I enjoyed it. I assume he means the lesson and not the elderberry extract.
Yeah.
And he quotes cites Psalm 91. All right.
Yes, I've been taking all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I've still
Okay.
got it pretty bad. Does your mom know you have it now?
Yeah.
I hadn't told her.
Stevie says this about COVID tests. He says, when positive is really negative, stay positive until negative. See you, Stevie.